Okay, Colonel Kim Olson, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My
Why
pleasure.
do you, why do you think it would be better for Democrats if you are going up against Republican Beth Van Duyne in the fall?
Well, I think history shows that this district is moving towards a Democratic representative, and that in 2018 we worked really hard, closed the gap to within a couple points. As you remember, Jack, I ran for Ag Commissioner and came within a point, taking this district, and of course, Beto won it by 3. It's demographics. I think the ideology is changing, and I think what the constituents of TX24 are saying are they want new leadership in DC. And so therefore, a Democrat is the one that's going to win here in the fall.
But why do you think you are the better candidate than Candace Valenzuela to represent the Democrats and go up against Beth Van Duyne?
I think that my winning the primary by 11 points in a 7-way is a first indicator of the kind of leader that this district is looking for. That's number one. Number two is that I have a depth of experience, especially in crisis situations. I am battle tested, 25 years in the uniform in the Air Force, trailblazer in the field of aviation, coming back and helping Texans right here when they were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, doing a nonprofit to help families reintegrate. And I think what is needed right now is someone who has a depth and breadth of experience in working in large organizations, making sure that we bring all people to the table to solve this pretty challenging problems that we have right now in our nation.
You are once again advertising and on TV. Your opponent this time is as well. You've made a decision to focus on your career.
Mhm.
Why was that? Really to stay positive.
Well, I think right now in our nation's mood, we do not need any more negativity. And as you're alluding to, Jack, there are outside agencies that are coming from DC and outside of the great state of Texas to try to tell Texans who they should vote for. And at the end of the day, it's the Texans are going to decide who their leader should be and who they want to represent them in DC. Look, we have challenges right now with our systemic racism. We have challenges with our healthcare system, and we certainly have challenges that are going to be on an economic scale. And what they want is a leader that is going to go to Congress and get stuff done. And that's the leader that I am, and that the voters have, as I said in the primary, have chosen. And I think it's going to pan out here next week, and it's certainly going to pan out in November.
Well, what is your reaction to the fact that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has decided to stay out of this race? They haven't endorsed either of you.
I think because their objective is they want, again, the constituents of TX24 to decide who their leaders are, not put their thumb on the scale as some of the outside super PACs have done. And again, I'm going to repeat myself. It is up to the Texans of TX24 to decide who they want to lead them in the next 2 years. And again, I believe that I am the person to take this district, the folks who live here, their hopes, their dreams, their fears to DC and work for the best for them and not be beholden to some super PAC that's in DC.
Given what we've experienced since the last time we had an in-depth conversation with COVID-19 and also with the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, what is your message to voters now?
Well, I think my message has been the same, Jack. It hasn't changed at all, that I am a battle-tested leader, that if you go up on our website, I have a 14-point plan around, one, reworking the police force, and two, around systemic changes to our judicial system to ensure that all are treated fairly. I think that in the COVID world that we live in, I stepped up as the leader in this district, did as most welfare checks to almost 5,000 people. We translated CDC guidelines into 7 different languages. We've held more town halls, Jack, in the last 3 months than the sitting congressman held in the last 10 years. We've been on the doors right now with what we call vote safe kits, which are a mask, glove, hand sanitizer, because we're teaching our constituents how to vote safely in the environment we are today. We invested in, just like in our primary, 10,000 mail-in ballot applications. And in the primary, we invested in 10,000 new registers, expanding the electorate. So I think how you should see people is how they act in a crisis. And of course, we and our campaign have stepped up to do what was best for the constituents of TX24. And I'm really, really proud of that.
Do you think Texas opened up too early?
I think the COVID spike shows that there were some decisions made that those at the leadership level probably will live to regret. There were other states, and as you can imagine, we talked to them across the spectrum, who weren't as aggressive in opening it back up, and they're seeing that their outbreaks have flattened out. They are able to control it. And the concern is, when we talk to the folks down in Houston and over at Parkland, that they're worried about their ICUs becoming overwhelmed. It's really the concern of the medical field giving us feedback that you don't want to as they talked about flattening the curve. Well, here we are again, spiking now a second time, because those states that opened too soon and folks got gathered back around without masks, without social distancing, and now we're spiking again.
So what, if you were a member of Congress, what do you think Congress should be doing? Because they've already passed the CARES Act, and there is a lot of debate and discussion about passing more. So what do you think needs to be done?
Well, I think there's a short-term goal, Jack, and then there's a long-term, and let me back into it. The long-term should be that we invest in the NIH, that we invest in the CDC, that we put more money into medical research instead of cutting those budgets. Look, we lost more in economic revenue in the last 3 months than we ever invested in the healthcare system in the last 10 years. So it's important that we pour money into research so that we can get a hold of this particular pandemic that we're on, because it may not be the last. And we should fund those organizations that research this and help it. I believe it does become a national security issue when you have your entire nation locked down, and that the global impact of this pandemic hurts not just trade, but it hurts our economy and it hurts the overall health of the planet. The second thing is the short term is exactly to your point. I believe that Congress is probably going to have to pass another relief package, because again, the economy is not opened back up. Folks are still unemployed. They can't get back into our great service organizations and economy that we have. And especially our small business folks. I mean, they have really taken the brunt of this. And that's the entrepreneur was the fastest growing portion of our economy. And I think we're going to have to reinvest in the local folks and their small businesses.
How concerned are you, because it's cost trillions? How
Mm-hmm.
concerned are you about the spending, and where does the government get all this? I guess they keep printing money.
Yeah.
Um, how concerned are you about that?
Well, I think as a country, we have to be fiscally responsible. And we have a debt, and some of that debt occurred before the pandemic struck, when we gave the big tax break. So that would be one place that you could fix that, is to reverse a tax break that they gave to big businesses, which to the tune of about $1 trillion came right out of the federal system. I think having that back, wouldn't that be nice to have that trillion right back? So you're going to have to find places in which we have to pull back those tax breaks that we gave, so that businesses who benefit from your and my federal tax dollars also have to contribute to the community at large, that they benefit because we have roads and airways and railroads, and that the military guards the sea lines that shipping goes through. They should pay their fair share in order to make the kinds of profits that they do on basically the backs of those of us that pay the federal government, federal taxes. So yeah, you should be very concerned about the debt that's occurring, and we're going to have to tackle that. But right now, the short-term goal is to keep people alive, to ensure we have an economy, and to make sure that we work within the system that's there in order to fix some of these systemic problems that we have.
My last question regarding COVID and the economy is related to unemployment insurance. We know that the federal government has expanded. It runs out, I think, July 31st, the $600 expanded unemployment benefits in addition to what people earn from the state. And my question is, there's some discussion now as to ending that and give people an incentive to get back to work, because some people have said they're making more money now than they did when they were working. Where do you fall on that?
Well, I think you have to shore up people that have lost their jobs. And let's just talk Texas right now. That may work in a state in which COVID isn't spiking. But really, we're going to ask those folks. And what COVID did, Jack, was expose the incredible inequities within our system. So those very people that we needed to stock shelves, to drive trucks, to clean up hospitals, to do the frontline works are the ones that were most vulnerable to the COVID outbreak and had the least amount of access to healthcare. And so it can't be just a one shot, you got to fix this. It's that's its entire spectrum of keeping, because when you have Americans that are healthy, you have a healthy economy. So it isn't just about the federal government continuing payouts in the unemployment world. It's about fixing, like I keep saying, the systemic problems that put people at risk, such that A, they're afraid to go back to work because they don't feel safe in their work environment, or B, they have to work because they can't make ends meet without it. We have to ensure that everyone has access to affordable, quality healthcare, and that they are protected as workers when you and I need them to go to work in order for to sustain our economy here in Texas and across the country.
So if push came to shove, though, because that is going to be a debate, I believe, in the House and in the Senate, as far as continuing this incentive, um, where would you stand on that? I understand what you're saying as far as giving people the protections, or at least them feeling safe when they go back to work. But where are you as far as providing an incentive to get back to work, or keeping, extending these additional federal benefits?
Well, in a way, Jack, it's an unfair question because it depends. If COVID is spiking and continues to spike in Texas, we've overwhelmed our healthcare system. People are dying from this disease because we can't protect workers. Then it is probably in our best interest as a nation to extend those benefits, because then there would be no incentive to go back to work if you have to risk your life to do it. So that's the one side of it. If you're implying that people are just going to stay home forever because we're paying them an extra $600 no matter what goes on, I think that's an unfair characterization of most American workers. They do go to work. They do want to invest. They do want to be a part of their community. They want their businesses up and running. But in fairness to those small business owners, if you own a restaurant and you can only run at 50% capacity, you can't make the profit margins you need in order to stay in business. And if I'm a service provider, the tips and the amount of pay that I get, because they're not, most of them don't get minimum wage when you're let's say a waitress or a bartender, you can't make ends meet by going back to work. So again, you have to provide the environment in order for workers to feel safe, first of all, in order to go back to work. That's probably the main thing to do. And right here in Texas right now, with losing folks right and left, with our healthcare system being overwhelmed and the spiking of COVID cases, I would say most workers probably don't feel safe enough to go back to work.
Yeah, I mean, I asked because I know that is up for debate in Congress. I did want to ask you about another issue that you brought up already that's being debated in Congress, and that's policing reform. What do you support?
Well, if you go to my website, kimforcongress.org, I have a 14-point thing that we worked with local community leaders in order to talk about this exact issue. And there are three things. Number one is, as a senior military officer, I am very concerned about the militarization of the police force. Armored, personnel carriers, helicopters being leveraged to act as if protesters are insurgents when they're practicing their First Amendment rights. I think this is a dangerous path for our folks that are there to protect and serve to go down. And I think having a political leader that leverages the military for his personal gain versus the protection of people and property is a very dangerous thing to have. Number two is, I believe that for the police force, that again, we need to refocus on what they're there to do. And many states have passed rules about no chokeholds And I think that's the pathway to take. The other thing is you can't just lay it at the feet of our men and women in blue. You have to look at the system and the social justice around that. And so if you have systemic racism, you have to have systemic changes in order to attack this problem that we have in our nation. And those are things like, you know, the privatization of prisons, that just because I'm poor and I can't make bail makes me sit in a jail cell for days and months on end. That, you know, issues that are underlying the school to prison pipeline that we have right now. So there are many things that you can do easily right off the top in order to help work this problem out. And I think that, again, go to my website. You've got 14 things laid out for you there.
Where are you on the idea of ending uh, qualified immunity for police officers?
Well, that's up for debate. It's an interesting debate right now. I've read on it on both sides of it. You know, this is something for the lawyers. And again, you might want to talk to your viewers out there. It means that you can't be sued when something happens and you're acting in the line of duty. But if they find that you've been criminal, then you can be sued and be held accountable. I think holding people accountable in their job is probably the most important thing, that they get adequate training around what policemen are to do, that they have the right equipment. And I'm going to interject here that for the cost of some of these, you know, the long guns that they have, again, the armored personnel carrier, many times the situation on the ground is around someone who's struggling with a mental health issue or a drug addiction issue. And right now, our prison systems are where we put mental health folks that suffer with mental health issues, that our prison systems are where people go when they have drug addiction and they've been arrested. If we would invest in those things versus equipment, I think you would find less issues on the streets of America. And so this is the kind of thing that I think we should work towards. And of course, Congress can do that. It can tie federal dollars to the kinds of policies you have down at the local level.
And where are you on the idea of defunding the police?
I'm not a defunding the police advocate. I am a repurposing what the police force is for. I believe that money should come to the police force, money should come to mental health providers, money should go into rehab, that monies that are spent on, again, the militarization could be better served in training. So there are many things you can do with funding, and you can tie funding, like I just said, Jack, the federal dollars, like we did when it was like, okay, you want money for your highways, you're going to pass a seatbelt law, or you're going to pass a speed limit law. We can do the same thing with the police force, and that's what I believe the House just passed about a week ago, and now it's sitting over at the Senate. Is that funding will come to police forces that rule out, you know, chokeholds and some of these other pretty aggressive techniques.
As you know, you were recently criticized for a remark you made about looting. You said, even if people loot, so what? Burn it to the ground if that's what it's going to take to fix the system. What did you mean by that?
Well, it was it was taken a bit out of context because it was an answer to it was about a 4-minute long answer to a question about how I felt about what the president, the commander in chief, was saying about those that were protesting. And my point was that when the commander in chief makes a statement that when the looting starts, the shooting starts, then we have lost all sense of rule of law. Meaning that if people act in that way by looting or destroying property, the punishment for that is not summary execution on the streets of the United States of America by National Guardsmen or policemen. That there are rules and laws in place that if people act in that way, that you get your day in court, that we have a justice system that you will go through. And if the punishment is there, then for Texas, it's, you know, a couple years in jail, or it's about a $10,000 fine. But what it's not is you don't get shot on the streets of America. And so watching that as, again, a senior military retiree, I am appalled that this is what our commander in chief was saying. And that was basically my answer to that.
Okay, but burn burn it to the ground, though. What did that mean?
Well, I think it's a metaphor for taking systems apart that aren't working for everyone. And look, we can say whatever we want about our judicial system, but right now, most people feel that it is not indeed like Lady Justice, the statue that's out there, that it's supposed to be blind and that the scales are supposed to be balanced. And if we watch when we see people murdered right on the streets of America, as we watch with the horrific act with George Floyd and many others that came before him, you can see that the system is neither blind nor balanced. And that was the metaphor I was referring to, that you sometimes have to take systems apart and put them back together that so they serve us all equally and fairly.
And as far as is there a balance? I know in the city of Dallas, for example, we're really just a couple of days away from a horrific anniversary when 5 police officers were shot and killed. And we have seen in Dallas where the police department has had trouble recruiting new officers until very recently, where they've now been able to attract more officers, even than they budgeted for. And so I'm wondering, is there a balance when talking about police reforms to make the necessary corrections with regards to training, de-escalation, et cetera, whatever else is going to be debated, and at the same time making it so that people still want to sign up to be police officers?
Your question, is there a balance in that? Is that what you're?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. So I would just hearken back to our military. Military is an all volunteer force. We've been in two combat zones for the last almost 2 decades now. And so you could ask the same thing. Do you struggle recruiting young men and women to come into uniform service, to sign a blank check up to and including their life in order to go into harm's way on the behalf of us? And for a time, the military struggled recruiting folks to come in, because if you entered the Army, especially, you were going to see combat. That was going to happen. And so it's probably the same thing for our police force. Number one, you have to train them appropriately, just exactly like you said, Jack. You have to make sure that you screen them, because I would offer, you can't train racism out of people. This is something that we have to work on as a nation, and we have to have courageous conversations about that. Second of all, you have to equip them properly. And it doesn't always mean that they're, full of riot gear, long guns. I keep harping back to armored personnel carrier, that you have to equip them with the knowledge and with the help. Sometimes a social worker might be the better person to bring on scene. Sometimes a psychologist might be the better person to talk them down. And so I think it's not just about the men and women in blue, it's the infrastructure that you put around them and the environment that is around them. And so they go into harm's way every day on behalf of us keeping civil order. But what we've seen is this use of force that is causing the deaths of mostly men and women of color. And this is what we must fix, Jack. This is what has to get fixed within our police forces all across this nation.
Well, Colonel Kim Olson, I really appreciate all the time you spent with us today. Thank you so much, and good luck to you next week.
You bet. Thank you for what you do, Jack. The press is what we need in this day and age, so you be well.
All right, you do the same. Thank you so much.
Take care, sir.
You too.